Now, just like the Earth revolves around the sun and rotates on its axis, the moon also rotates on its axis and revolves around the Earth. So the moon goes in a path around the Earth, giving it its orbit around the Earth, so that's its revolution, and it rotates on its axis. And you might be wondering, why do we not see the rotation on the axis? Why does the moon always look the same? Well, it rotates on its axis at the same rate as it goes around the Earth. So it takes 28 days approximately for the moon to make one complete rotation and 28 days to make one complete revolution. Whereas Earth takes 1 day to make a rotation and 365 days to make a revolution. Okay. Now, because the moon does not produce its own light, we only see the light that's reflected off of the moon. Any light that's not reflected off the moon, we don't see. And so we always have to ask ourselves, when we're looking at the position of the moon, and what do we see? Why do we see that? So in this case, the moon is between the Earth and the sun. And so the rays from the sun will come and hit the moon, and then they'll reflect back towards the sun. So none of them will reflect towards Earth, so we don't see any moon in the night sky, and we call this our new moon. Okay, and then about 3.5 days later, the moon, as it's going around the Earth in its orbit, again, the sun's rays hit the moon, and a full half of the moon is always illuminated. But in this case, because of how it is, we only see this slight sliver, which gives us our crescent. Now we call it a waxing crescent because we're going from our new moon to our full moon. Okay, and then we go ahead another 3.5 days. So now from my new moon to here, this is about 7 days. So again, half the moon is illuminated by the sun, but if we draw our line here, we only see this portion that's illuminated. We don't see this dark part, and that's why we see half of the moon. And we call this our first quarter. And then we go ahead another approximately 3.5 days. And now in this case, because of the position of the moon, the sun rays come, illuminate half the moon in its position, allows us to see 3/4. So we call this our waxing gibbous. Now we go ahead another 3.5 days. So now from this point, my new moon to my full moon, this is now 14 days. Took 7 to get to my first quarter, another 7 to get to full. We can now see the entire half of the moon that is illuminated. And so we have our full moon. We go ahead, and again now we can see 3/4 of the illuminated surface of the moon. So it's a gibbous again, but because now I'm going from full moon to new moon, it's called waning. We advance now here. Now this is 21 days from my new moon. So 7 to first quarter, 7 to half, 7 to 3/4. Again, half the surface of the moon is illuminated, but because only this light is reflected, light on this half is reflected off to space, we only see 1/4 of the moon. And then finally, we have our waning crescent, and we can only see 1/4 of it, and then we're back to our new moon. Now, you don't need to know all those diagrams from before. What you need to know is this diagram. And in this diagram, what we can see is if my sun is over here, my moon is going around the Earth in a counterclockwise direction, we always have half of the moon's face illuminated. Okay, always half of the moon's face is illuminated. But because of where we are on Earth, only a little bit of that light gets reflected. And so it's a question of how much of the reflected light do we see. My dark parts here are what I don't see. So this is my moon. This half of the moon is in dark because the sun's rays don't hit it. This half of the moon is in light because the sun rays do hit it. But because none of the reflected rays go from the moon to the earth, it's dark. And so my new moon would appear completely dark. When I go to my first quarter, half of my moon is illuminated. But if I draw an imaginary line like that through there, I don't see this half because these rays would be reflected off into space. But on this side of the moon, this way, the light's reflected, so it lets me see a quarter of the moon. If I come to here, the sun's rays hit the moon. Again, only half the surface of the moon is illuminated, half is in dark. But because this entire half that's illuminated can reflect its rays back to Earth, it looks like a full moon. And it gives us our full moon. Okay. So this is the diagram that you need to know. There's a space on your sheet on the bottom after you list your phases of the moon, which goes new moon 1, waxing crescent 2, first quarter 3, waxing gibbous 4, full moon 5, waning gibbous 6, last quarter 7, waxing crescent 8. This is the diagram that you're required to know. So pause the video here and copy down the diagram and the phases of the moon.